You are entering a sacred yes transmission, a real-time frequency broadcast from the field of mystery. These messages arrive as they are received, raw, unedited, and alive. Listen with the part of you that already knows. Listen with the part of you that broadcasts your life into being. The transmission begins now. 19 years sober. 19 years. That is extraordinary. Not because I became perfect and not because life stopped being painful. Definitely not because fear disappeared or every pattern dissolved forever, but because for 19 years, some part of me kept choosing to return to life again and again and again. And when I look at everything that I've been speaking about lately, aliveness, embodiment, sovereignty, creativity, sequence, devotion to truth, staying present instead of escaping, it all feels connected to this root. Sobriety wasn't only about stopping something. It became learning how to stay, learning how to feel, learning how to live without leaving myself, learning how to tolerate joy, learning how to survive life without numbing, and learning how to become available to my own soul. And now I look at my life, painting portals at midnight, talking to birds and bees, building worlds, making oracle decks, creating Stella, helping women remember themselves, turning my church into an art sanctuary, choosing aliveness over performance, interrupting old emotional rescue patterns in real time. This is not small. 19 years is not only recovery, it's reclamation. And honestly, the moment I had with a friend today feels connected to this anniversary as well, because addiction and emotional overfunctioning often share the same nervous system root. If I can manage the feeling, fix the situation, rescue the person, control the energy, maybe I can finally feel safe. And today I stay with myself because that is sobriety. Not merely abstaining from substances, but remaining present inside your own life. Being sober for a long time is strange. At first, we think sobriety is about not drinking. And then eventually we realize sobriety is about being awake. And being awake is intense. Because life is incredibly vivid when you stop buffering it. You notice everything. The beauty, the grief, the tension in someone's voice, the bird outside the window, the way a room feels after an argument, the way your body reacts to shame. The difference between survival and aliveness. The moment you abandon yourself and then the moment you return, you feel all of it. And sometimes sobriety is deeply romanticized by people who are desperate to escape pain. But long-term sobriety often looks less like sainthood and more like standing in the kitchen at 11:47 p.m. eating toast while existentially unraveling and simultaneously admiring moonlight on the counter. It's ordinary and cosmic at the same time. And I think one of the hardest things about long-term sobriety is this: eventually, nobody claps anymore. At 30 days, people celebrate you. At 1 year, people celebrate. At 5 years, people are amazed. But at 19, it becomes you just living a life, paying bills, painting walls, having relationship triggers, buying groceries, feeling joy, feeling terror, trying not to overact to a text message, learning nervous system regulation, discovering your patterns again, and returning again. And there's something both lonely and sacred about that, because sobriety eventually stops being an event and becomes a way of inhabiting reality. You begin realizing, oh, this isn't about alcohol anymore. This is about consciousness. It's about whether you can remain present inside your own experience enough without immediately needing to escape, numb, rescue, control, merge, perform, collapse, disassociate, inflate, or disappear. Sobriety is not the absence of a substance, it's the presence of self. One thing people don't talk about enough is that sobriety can make you wildly creative, because all that energy that once went towards escaping reality now has somewhere else to go. Sometimes it becomes art, sometimes spirituality, sometimes obsession, sometimes service, beauty, deep feeling, sometimes building entire universes out of pain and wonder and humor and truth. I think sobriety also creates a strange relationship with freedom. You know exactly how quickly a human being can lose themselves. So freedom stops meaning I do whatever I want. Freedom becomes I remain conscious enough to choose. It's a very different thing. And after enough years sober, there can also be grief. Not necessarily grief for drinking itself, but grief for innocence. Grief for the years lost. Grief for versions of self. Grief for realizing how many people are still asleep inside survival patterns they don't even recognize. But alongside that grief comes profound gratitude for tiny things. Good tea, cat prints on painted floors, music that cracks your heart open, a regulated nervous system, a conversation with your dad, a bird appearing at night at the right moment, lime water, moonlight painting portals at 9 p.m. because your soul suddenly said yes. Sobriety can make life feel unbearably raw sometimes, but also unbearably alive. Today marks 19 years sober, which is honestly hilarious because nobody tells you sobriety eventually becomes these things: crying over a dead bee in the garden, getting emotionally repaired by cinnamon rice pudding, painting portals at 10 p.m., talking to birds like tiny sky therapists, reorganizing your entire life around aliveness, and realizing your nervous system thinks an unanswered text is a medieval attack. Nobody tells you sobriety eventually becomes feeling everything. The grief, the beauty, the body, the intuition, the terror, the joy, the weird little miracles. The moment you notice you almost abandoned yourself and then didn't. Nobody tells you that after enough years sober, it becomes life itself. Life itself becomes the substance. Because the truth, it is wild here. 1 minute you're regulating your nervous system with lime water and breath work, and the next minute you're standing barefoot in wet paint while your cat leaves tiny paw prints across the floor, and you suddenly understand God. 19 years sober. Not numb, not asleep, not perfect, and not enlightened. Just deeply, painfully, beautifully alive. And that, for me, has been worth everything. The deeper truth is that sobriety is not merely the absence of substances. It is the presence of life itself. And most people, sober or not, are still looking for ways to leave themselves through overworking, scrolling, shopping, controlling, rescuing, productivity, spiritual bypassing, perfectionism, relationship obsession, chronic busyness, self-improvement addiction, numbness disguised as discipline, high functioning, constant noise. When I speak about sobriety from this place, I'm not separating myself from other people. I'm actually speaking to the universal human condition, the terror and beauty of fully inhabiting a life. It's not, I used to drink anymore. It's, this is what it feels like to be conscious. Because long-term sobriety creates an intimacy with life that many people will never experience. You begin noticing how uncomfortable silence is for people. How fast humans move away from feeling. How normalized disassociation is. How often exhaustion is glorified. How many people call survival living. How vulnerable joy actually feels. And how terrifying presence can be. But also how delicious tea tastes. How meaningful tiny rituals become. How sacred ordinary moments are. How much life speaks when you slow down. How creative energy returns. How your body tells the truth. How alive grief actually is. How funny humans are. How strange and beautiful existence is. That's sobriety. not good behavior, not recovery identity, not endless retelling of rock bottom stories. Awakeness. I think this is important too. I'm not speaking from the energy of deprivation. The energy is I became available to life. Most sobriety conversations center around what was removed. Your truth centers around what became possible. Intimacy with reality, creativity, embodiment, discernment, emotional honesty, nervous system awareness, awe, humor, and aliveness. Sobriety eventually becomes, can I remain conscious inside this moment without needing to escape myself? This actually applies everywhere, with money, with love, with conflict, food, shame, success, silence, joy, receiving, attention, fear, grief, beauty. My bones truth is that sobriety is a relationship with consciousness itself. And that is a profound conversation. The word sober originally meant clear-minded, not intoxicated, not under the influence. But when I really sit with the word, it points towards something much deeper than whether alcohol or substances are present. Sobriety is clarity, not perfect clarity and not constant enlightenment, but the willingness to experience reality without immediately needing to distort, escape, inflate, numb, sedate, or abandon it. Which means a person can technically never drink and still not be sober in consciousness. And someone else can be 19 years alcohol free, yet still discover new layers of sobriety unfolding inside the emotional sobriety, financial sobriety, relational sobriety, nervous system sobriety, spiritual sobriety, energetic sobriety. Intoxication takes many forms. Some people intoxicate themselves with chaos, some with control, some with productivity, some with fantasy, some with validation, some even with self-hatred, some with constant motion, some with healing, and some with superiority, and some with suffering itself. Real sobriety asks, what remains when I stop leaving myself? That's why sobriety can feel both peaceful and incredibly raw. Because you start noticing what's actually happening, what you actually feel, what your body actually knows, what your relationships actually are, what your patterns actually cost, what brings you alive, and what drains your spirit. Where you perform, where you disappear, and where you stay. Sobriety is presence without anesthesia. And the fascinating thing is, once you begin experiencing life this way, sobriety stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like intimacy. Intimacy with yourself, with life, with grief, with joy, with this sacred ridiculousness of being human at all. I became conscious enough to participate in my own life. The story of my original Stella, the story of my big awakening. I was walking back to the bar on a Saturday afternoon in the bright sunshine because I had left my car there because I was too drunk to drive home the night before. In my hungover state, eyes squinting in the bright light, I turned the corner from my block into the busy main roadway, the 2-lane highway which crosses over top an 8-lane interstate. I was walking, minding my own business, as I looked up and there was a man crossing the street in the middle of the road, obviously drunk, and all of a sudden, an SUV hit him. No brakes, no sounds, no screams. I watched the whole thing happen. He flew up into the air and then came landing down probably about 20 feet from where I was standing. I froze. I just stood there. I froze. And the only thing that happened was this ancient voice that said, I want to live. I waited for the man to move. I waited for the ambulance, but then I just kept walking. I was in absolute shock. I walked up to the bar. I called my friend and said, I need your help. She came down and we shared one last Bloody Mary together. And I said, I need to get sober. We got in the car. She drove me to this little shop, the place where they sell coins for your 30-day sobriety. And you could come and pop in, have a cup of coffee, talk about anything. The woman behind the counter, her name was Stella. And so we sat and we talked and I cried. And she said, what are you most afraid of? And I said, I don't think I can do this for the rest of my life. I don't think I cannot have one more drink, one more glass of wine for the rest of my life. And she smiled and said, okay, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life, but you have to do it today. And if you can't do it today, you have to do it for the next hour or the next moment. And eventually those moments become days, and the days become months, and the months become years. And before you know it, you don't even remember what a real drink tastes like. And that was my story 19 years ago. Definitely a threshold moment. The wisdom Stella gave me is essentially sequencing. Not forever, now, not your whole life, this moment, this breath, this minute. Stay here, stay conscious, stay with yourself. It's the entire architecture. And now my psyche later transformed Stella into the voice of my work. Because the original Stella represented grounded presence, life, one moment at a time, consciousness, staying. And my current Stella character often represents fear, panic, catastrophizing, protection, and resistance. Almost like my psyche has split the experience into two archetypes. the witness and the terrified protector. And now my art lets them coexist. "19 years later, that line carries a completely different emotional weight than it did in that little shop. Because I now know she was right. Not because life became easy, but because my life became inhabited. And the truth, the story explains my devotion to aliveness. I watched unconsciousness collide with mortality in broad daylight. And somewhere inside myself, I chose life. Today marks 19 years sober. And strangely enough, I don't think about sobriety as actually about alcohol anymore. I want to live. That moment changed everything. I didn't know then that Stella was teaching me far more than sobriety. She was teaching me presence. Because honestly, I think my whole life since then has been built around that moment. Art, sequence, aliveness, embodiment, love, staying. Learning how to remain conscious inside a human life without constantly needing to escape it. Sobriety for me became less about not drinking and more about becoming available to life, which is both beautiful and completely unhinged. Anyway, 19 years today, still here, still alive, still learning how to stay. This field is now complete. Take a breath and return to yourself with new clarity. Your remembering does not end here. It continues in every step, every choice, every broadcast you make. Thank you for entering this field of mystery. The next transmission will find you when you're ready.